Hello, Bishop Stephen. Good to see you today. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Russell. Yes, I'm very pleased to be here with you and to be talking with you. It's the whole thing about Zoom is that we can, it's much easier to meet in some ways, isn't it? Rather than having to rendezvous somewhere in London. So it's very good to be in your study.
Excellent. Well, it's good to have you and to talk both as a Dawson Bishop, Bishop of Ely, and also as our Vice Chairman of the Ecclesiastical Law Society.
Our illustrious chair, the worshipful Mark, was very, very persuasive, as you might imagine.
Of course. Well, it's great to have you as our Vice Chair. Now, I often begin these videos by asking people how they got interested in canon law in the first place.
Well, I confess to having been an archdeacon in a previous life, and so ecclesiastical law was part of my remit, as it were, and making sure that we lived in an ordered way in the diocese. And the Chancellor, who was keeping a beady eye on me, was Rupert Bursell. So I was well inducted. But also, my surviving uncle is a Roman Catholic priest, now mostly retired, but he was an ecclesiastical lawyer and a judge in the marriage courts of the Catholic Church in both in this country and also supporting the Catholic Church in Norway.
Right, so canon law.
It's in the blood. It's in the blood.
Absolutely. Oh, that's wonderful to hear. So Bishop, as a Dawson Bishop, what do you see as the role, the importance of canon law in the life of the Church?
I think that the first thing I'd like to say is that we tend to think, and we can be rather impatient about ecclesiastical law and indeed ecclesiastical lawyers when they say to bishops, Bishop, read the fine print, you can't do that. And of course, it's always irritating when people are in fact trained to be ready and have the courage to tell a bishop no. But it's important protection for bishops and for the whole church that we have an ordered life, and that canon law is there not to upset or inhibit the mission of the Church, the mission of God. Quite the reverse. It's there to support and sustain the mission of the Church in ways which are genuinely transparent, and in ways that any activity can be properly interrogated by anybody, and provides a structure for that. And I think that when we don't see that, we forget. I think there's a wonderful exchange in The Man for All Seasons, where Thomas More is talking to his very, very agitated son-in-law who wants to scrap loads of law, and More says, if we didn't have the hedges of the law, which, as it were, protect the ground, and the devil came to grab us, there's nothing to prevent his leaping upon us if the hedges of the law are not there. And that would apply to all law, not just to church law. But I think I want to have a positive understanding of canon law, and I know that it's not sexy to most people, and most people only encounter it when they've made a mistake. But actually, to see that canon law, ecclesiastical law, is an agent of or support for mission and ministry. You think how many of the canons are directly about enabling the roles of say, church wardens or PCCs or indeed bishops. So I would like to see a clearer understanding, and I'd be sort of evangelistic about there being a clear understanding of the state of the church law, bearing in mind, though, that, and this is a very important point, that it shouldn't be lagging behind the change which the church needs readily to embrace. So I think, when Archbishop Fisher chose to make the reform of canon law the biggest thing of his ministry post-war after Temple. Indeed, I think Temple wanted Fisher to be his successor because he was much more likely to keep the church together and ordered rather than have the highs of Temple's imagination and intellectual grasp. Fisher was there to administer things, which was no less of a holy enterprise, but it took a long time, from 1604 to 1946, for anybody to think about serious change in the canons.
Yes.
And it still took nearly 20 years, more than 20 years, after his time for the new code to come in. And I think you and your friends who are meeting in study groups at the moment, organised by ELS around the canons, are recognising that there's lots of change that is still there to be made, but is there a will? And of course, it's not whizzy, but if we want to continue to be ordered and not too ragged, then we need to be thinking about this, I think, much more clearly.
Absolutely. I mean, of course, there are amending canons that they seem to come through almost every year or two. But as you say, they're not wholesale. They're addressing particular pressing issues, aren't they? I mean, on that question, Bishop, what would you say from your perspective are the pressing issues of the day that canon law can help to enable the church to find a solution?
Well, I think that ecclesiastical law around issues of say, pastoral organisation, the whole way in which a more systemic reform of canon law would go along with the simplification agenda of the General Synod, so that there is a much clearer alignment, and so we don't have. I know in our common law system, a lot is about creating a lot out of one small precedent. So I'm not against the amending canon process, but I think some kind of systemic relationship between a systemic review of our canons alongside the simplification agenda will make sense. But I think also that our canons, I think one of the things that Fisher particularly abominated was the tribes of the Church of England. He didn't really care much for evangelicals, but neither did he care for Anglo-Catholics either. And of course, what he wanted was a canonical system that was fair for everybody, even though Anglo-Catholics were at the time very, very suspicious of him. And well, those of us who are Anglo-Catholics, it's part of our DNA to be suspicious, especially of bishops. But I think that the point is, though, that what he was trying to have was a system that was applied to all fairly, and because at the moment there are divisions when we are both a diverse and divergent family in some ways, that the law is one of our key protections, and in fact that it's one can joke about where all of us are in communion with the church commissioners, but actually our communion is served by our ecclesiastical law framework, and we mustn't forget that.
Absolutely, I think that's right. And we've seen just in the past few months during this COVID crisis, haven't we, how so many of the things that have happened, we've immediately gone to the law to find in different circumstances, how is the ordering of the church affected? And we look at the law and find that there often are answers there.
And quite clear, say for instance over ordinations, it's that there were, understandably people concerned about not having people ordinands and their families in close proximity with others for too long, thought you could have an ordination outside the Eucharist. Well, ecclesiastical law is very clear that you can't do that, and so everybody who thought about that withdrew the idea immediately when they checked with the lawyers. And I just think something like that, or the current debate about is it legal or not for the Church of England to allow, for the House of Bishops to allow individual cups at communion. I mean, I think that it's a balmy idea, whether it's legal or not. But I think that there's at least the legal advice may be contended, but it's quite clear that canon law is protecting Anglican theology, sacramental theology, around even if it's a quiet assumptions around concomitance and also, of course, the common cup. And I think what we don't need to get sort of all romantic about that. What we need to say was, what does the canon say, and what does the Book of Common Prayer say, and what does our tradition say? And you have those things coming together, which I hope will give us a clear answer, or give a clear direction for the House of Bishops to make a decision around. So it's and of course, it's another example of people not wanting to waste a good crisis to get their way, and I recognise that, and I admire it in some respects, as long as people are wanting to bring about changes that I approve of course.
Absolutely. Well, we thought a bit about the past and about the present and this year. What about the future, Bishop? What would you see as the role of canon law, of the society, and in particular, as you're talking from the perspective of a bishop, what do you think that the role of the House of Bishops and you as a bishop will be with respect to canon law in the years ahead?
Yes, I mean, I think that we've been very fortunate in the succession of chief legal advisors we've had in the Church of England, and I think that thinking of Stephen, who's just recently retired, was absolutely marvellous, and Alex has a very fine person, a very fine mind, and I'm amazed how he can just he just switch him on, and it all comes it comes out in order, in wonderful order. So I think that we need to make sure that we sustain that quality of legal opinion that we can trust, and I think we've been very blessed and are blessed, but that mustn't be left to go away in the future. I think that there has to be flexibility. So in a sense that not that we just disregard canon law, but the canon law, as I say, needs to catch up so that it continues to serve the purposes of mission and ministry for the Church of God. I think that we're going to face, I think, quite a lot of change, both systemically and relationally, into the future, just because of the way, I don't think COVID-19 has changed us. It's just accelerated the changes that were going to happen anyway. And we need the resource of the law to ensure that that's ordered and not cavalier. Because actually it's also about protecting lives, so that nobody is trampled on. That I expect that of course, some of canon law is particularly, certainly Anglican canon law, is there to ensure that the bishops don't outdo themselves. And our polity with regard to cathedrals and so on, providing balancing of powers so that bishops can't get away with being bullies. Well, and I thoroughly support that. And so how do we get a flexibility? And that would mean how does Synod give time to things? And as I said before, creating that synergy between simplification and a review of canon law, rather than just being piecemeal about things. I think the key thing for that, I suppose, is education for clergy. And I think that one of the things that really attracts me about ELS is its educational drive, and the fact you've got these. Just be giving word about the next Northern lecture, and that we're offering to go to theological colleges and institutions to be regional as well as national in this passion to educate people about ecclesiastical law. Well, I mean, nobody else is doing that, and certainly not with any kind of systematic energy and will. And it just seems to me to be vital. And that the society, perhaps under Mark's leadership, and of course we've got no better person to be our president than Bishop Christopher Hill, who is well, I suppose short of God, is fairly omniscient in these areas. That we've got the right kind of crew, if you like, and with very engaged younger clergy like you, to be for that offer to be genuine and to be picked up. I suppose one of the things we just need to be even more conscious of our communications plan, so that people know that we're here and are there to help. You know, with IME2 training, you know, regional training for offering training for archdeacons and so on. So
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we've had the past few months, of course, a lot more things happening online, and without those restrictions of who can attend based on geography, there's been such interest in our events. So the webinar last week on canon law education and the formation of priests, we had 180 people signing up for that from lots of theological education institutes and all sorts of places. There is such interest, and I think if, as you say, our society is able to respond to that growing interest, it's really exciting.
So I think that, you know, but of course the reason for having you know, a bishop, as a diocesan bishop, as the vice chair, is I've never seen myself as being decorative, and I think that the reason why Mark approached me was that is for the society to get more access and to be known more widely by policymakers and those with influence, so that that we would naturally, as individual bishops or as groups of bishops, might approach the society to put on events, that to you know, visit out, talk to our curates. And so there's that. I think that the you know, that the having me as in the House of Bishops, and of course other people keen on the LS, like Viv, the Bishop of Bristol, and Christine, Bishop of Newcastle, just to have the advocates in the House of Bishops to say, well, actually, you know, the producing material pertinent to our discussions and decisions around reform of the CDM, you know, that it's good to be having independent views responsibly provided with the right kind of academic and legal and relational background. It's not that we're asking you to do the work that we need to do it for ourselves, but actually having what we might do interpreted and interrogated is no bad thing at all. So that's one. That's it. And I think it's also about promoting the idea that, you know, canon law is not some set of dusty volumes, you know, to mostly to ignore. It's the ordering of the living church, and obviously bishops, you know, of all people, need to be aware of that. I mean, because since one of our key responsibilities as the apostolic leaders of the church is to be those who are responsible for faith and order in our common life. So I think that it's only a little job then that the society has to do.
Absolutely. Well, we've got our work cut out, but as you say, there are so many great people and so much energy. And I mean, it's been wonderful to talk to you as our vice chairman, Bishop, and look forward to many more things we do in the life of the society, where you know where you're able to be involved and pushing these things forward.
And I think actually underlining we've not really talked about it, but in underlining this, I would want to say, wouldn't I, that that at the base of all this enterprise is a divine law. You know, that underneath all of this is our aligning ourselves through our reason and our prayers, aligning ourselves with the will of God. And it's interesting. My very first connection with the society was when Mark got me to come and say grace at dinner, at an ELS dinner, and I knew somehow then I was hooked. And I'm very pleased that, you know, if we can be servants of that divine law, and the society can be helping us with that, then we're on the right track.
Absolutely. Well, amen to that. And thank you, Bishop, for talking.
My great pleasure.
It's been marvellous. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.